What's up everyone and welcome to another Unity tutorial. My name is Vinay and I'm also known as the Lazy Indian Techie. Today we're going to be looking at how to set up Unity with Git, and this tutorial is meant for beginners as well as some intermediate level developers who've maybe been developing for Unity but you really haven't used version control, or you've heard of it and haven't had time to kind of get it integrated into your workflow. I want to stress on the importance of using something like Git. I've seen a lot of people start projects and work halfway through projects and lose all their work and having to manually back them up to an external hard drive. While that is also a good practice, I think it's better that we leverage existing tools like Git, which might seem daunting at first, but it's actually quite easy to set up. So today we'll go through creating a new project, how to set up a Git ignore, how to set up Git LFS, and that's for large files, and then also set up the Unity project itself to track these Git changes. So to get started, what I'm going to do is open up Google. If you don't have a GitHub account, you need to go to github.com, create an account, and you can do that by just going through the website and just linking either your Gmail or something like that and setting up that account. We won't cover that. So once you are in GitHub, there are multiple ways of doing this. I prefer the command line way, and I'm comfortable with the command line. You can also use GitHub Desktop to do the same thing, but I wanted you all to understand the basic premise and concept behind how this is done. So once you're in GitHub, what I'm going to do is show you guys the most convenient way of doing this. I can probably do this faster within the command line, but let's do this on the web. We're going to open up github.com and then hit on this new repository. Now, you would ideally have a new repository for each project, right? So keep, when you start a new project in Unity, you would create a new repository. You can create the Unity project beforehand and then probably try and do this step. Up to you. I'm just doing it this way. So I'm just going to call this repo maybe. So there is this option saying template, but I don't want to use this yet. You can call this repo Unity Git tutorial, or I'm just going to keep it simple and say Unity tutorial, right? A simple tutorial in Unity. Give it a good description. Now, whether you keep it public or private, it doesn't really matter. That's up to you. I'm going to leave it at public. The next thing that you have is a README file. A README file is a basic description of your project. I'm going to ignore this for right now and not put in a README file. It is a good practice to have a README file, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I don't really need it. Then there's a git ignore. Now, there are templates for a git ignore. You can use it here, but I'm going to use a very specific git ignore that I have, which you will see in the next few steps. So normally you would go in here and type Unity and you automatically get a git ignore, right? But I'm not going to do that right now. So license. Now license is again, it's good to choose a license. I'm just going to choose maybe an MIT license, which is kind of very lenient, and we won't get into licenses, but you can do your own research by clicking on learn more licenses. So here we're going to go ahead and create a repository, and the moment you create a repository, you're going to see something blank like this, right? So what I would ideally do is I'm going to clone this to my local system. Now in Git, there are two concepts. One is the local Git, which we will look at in a bit, and this is the remote, right? You have to understand these two different concepts. There is local and then there is remote. There's a local and remote is also known as origin, right? Because you created the repository here, and because you created the repository here and it's on the cloud, this is going to be your remote. What you work on your system is going to be local. So the basic concept of Git is that you make changes locally and push it remote. You make changes locally, you push it to remote, and then say someone else on your team is working on a remote, you need to pull in those changes locally. So this is what push and pull are generally meant in Git. So it might seem a little complex if you're a beginner when it comes to Git, but don't worry about it. Just follow along, and if you have any specific questions even after this tutorial, just do leave them in the comments. I will either make a clarification video or make another video which focuses on those particular questions as well, or reply to them in the comments, right? So far we're good. We've gone to github.com and we have created a repository, right? So now what we're going to do is say, click on this green button that says code, and we're going to click on the HTTPS. Now there are various options. I normally do it through GitHub's own CLI, which we won't get into, but for the purposes of this tutorial, just click on the HTTPS version, and you're going to go hit copy URL to clipboard and keep that handy, right? So now that we're done with the step of creating a GitHub repo, right? Let's just quickly hop over to our command line. You can do this in GitHub desktop. If you prefer GUI tools, you can probably there's another option here which you can click on open with GitHub desktop. It's going to do the same thing that I'm going to do right now. It's going to be simpler, but I'm just going to do it through the command line. You can also download this whole repo as a zip file, and once you've downloaded it as a zip file, you can open it up there. So one of the key focuses of this video is to also show you how to move the Unity files into this particular Git repository. So now that we cloned it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my command line. Now on a Mac, I use something called warp. You can use the terminal. On Windows, it's you need to get like a particular GitHub setup. I'm not going to cover the Windows context and those things. If you're more comfortable with GitHub desktop, you can do that. So what I'm going to do is the command that I copied there, I'm already in the folder that I need to be. So if you see, I've created a folder called Unity tutorials, and in that I'm going to quickly go ahead and clone. I'm going to paste this, and you see there is a simple URL there, right? So what we're going to do is say git clone and this URL, right? So this is your origin or remote URL which gets set up here. Now you would do this cloning outside of your project folder. Okay, I will show you how this is done. So I'm going to go ahead and hit git clone, and you see that quickly what it's done is, if I type ls here, you see that it's created a repo with the exact same name that we have on our GitHub. Let's just open this up in Finder, and if you see here, there is a license file that we chose. If you had chosen a readme file, then that readme file would have kind of popped in here. So this is kind of the folder with the folder structure that we created on GitHub. Let's just go back. You see there's an MIT license file. There's a license file here. So the files that you see here are basically cloned and synced back to where you cloned it right now. All right. So as long as we're clear on that, now I'm going to change my directory to Unity tutorial. And the moment I do that, you will start seeing the command line have a very specific additional data here, and this says main. Now what is main? As you can see, it already says git, and if I just do lslh, you see there's a .git file here. Okay, so any folder that is tracked by git and has to be tracked by git will have a hidden folder called a .git folder, which automatically sits and tracks all your changes. Now we can browse that particular folder. Right, and you'll see a lot of files like head, config, and all that, which are all hidden files, which we don't need to get into. Index files that are basically a small little system that are available. I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to enable hidden files, and you see there's a git folder here which has all these various config files and all that, which is basically the entire local git system that keeps track of all your files. Now what you've done is you've converted this folder to a git folder, and the entire thing is run by this git folder. All right, so this is important. Just keep this in mind. This .git folder, if you remove it for some reason, let me say I move it out there. Okay. Let's copy this and I'm going to say move it to this folder. Okay. Now you see what happens here if I type git status. It says fatal, not a Git repository. So if you notice, this is a very important point that a lot of people get tripped up over, right? Because I've moved the .git folder out of here, the folder that we cloned is no longer a Git folder. All right. So if we go one folder up and we switch to the folder to which we change it to, you see immediately that that folder has become the tracked Git folder. And if you do git status, you see there is a particular readme file and says it's been deleted and all that. So I wouldn't suggest you actually do this, but I'm just showing you how you can actually, before you start a Unity tutorial, kind of move the folder around. Okay. This is just a one-time thing. I wouldn't suggest you do it later on. So now that you see that, I'm just going to go ahead and actually go back into this and move this back to our Git tutorial. And we're done, right? Go back and go to CD Unity tutorial, which is our main folder. And you see it's back to Git status. All right. So now that we got that important step out of the way, now what we're going to do now is go over to Unity and start a new project, right? So let me click here. I'm just going to use a basic project, go to new project and say Git tutorial. And let's keep it at 3D core, just because. And I'm gonna set this up to say the lazy techie, go to tutorials and let's say Unity. I'm just gonna select this, okay. Now I'm gonna select a different folder. This is my main folder. This is our Unity tutorial folder. I'm not going to open it inside this because what it will do is create a subfolder inside this, and that's not what we want. So I'm just going to select this overall project folder, and I'm going to create a project, right? Quickly create, and Unity is kind of loading up. I hope it is. Yeah. Cool. Unity is opening up on my second screen, so let's move that in there, right? So this is the basic premise of how you want to start your entire project. While Unity is actually opening up, I'm going to introduce you to actually git ignore and git LFS. Now, let me actually open up the documentation on now. Let's see, git LFS, right? Now, Git LFS is nothing but large file storage. We do know that there are particular files that we have that are heavy and shouldn't be tracked. So what Git offers is something called Git LFS, which basically takes all the bigger files, like if you have media files, if you have image files, which are very important in game development, and it keeps them, stores them separately. I won't go into too much of the technical detail, but just understand that normal text files like this README, like this license file, are very small, and text-based files are easily tracked by Git, but Git has trouble tracking big files, and GitHub doesn't give you automatically storage on these things. So you would have to use something called a Git LFS. And what I like to do is always set up a Git LFS in the starting. So before Unity gets fully initialized, let me just go ahead and set up Git LFS. Now, how you do that is actually say Git LFS install. Okay. This video is not covering how to install Git on your system and get that set up. I will make a separate video for that. Okay. So if you've not yet installed Git, I will create a separate video and I will link that video to this video so you can watch how to get started with Git. This whole video is only focused on working with Unity and Git, assuming that you have Git already working on your system. Okay. So I will make another video because I know that a lot of people who are watching this video wouldn't have actually had Git installed already, maybe. Right. So once we have Git LFS initialized, what that does is we can simply say Git LFS track And as you can see in my autocomplete, it says .mp4. So this is the command that you do, and the moment you hit enter, you will get a git attributes file. Okay, so you see there's a git attributes file, and I'm going to open this git attributes file in there, and you see there is a particular command that says all kinds of .mp4, you filter it as LFS, and then there is a particular structure of this code that is there. And this is where I come into, people have made these files already. Okay, so we don't need to sit and write out every single Git LFS file attribute that is needed. I'm going to go ahead, and I have the Git attributes file here, which I've used for another project. And I'm just going to copy over. This has got all the kind of files like physics material 2D, what to do with JPEGs and everything. This is something that's curated from the internet, and people have painstakingly kind of created this Git LFS file. So I'm going to go to raw and just copy the whole Git attributes file and come back here, say nano.git attributes, and just paste that in here. Okay, and done. So now I've added a file to Git, and if I do git status, you see that I've added a new file to Git, which is a Git attributes. So we're done with Git attributes, which handles all our big files, right? Now what I'm going to do is also add a git ignore. Now let me again show you what a git ignore is. A git ignore is a file that basically tells you how you need to block certain files from being tracked. Now, if you are aware, whenever you start a Unity project, there's an entirely big library file that's created. Now, the purpose of library files is just an intermediate file which gets kind of launched every single time you want to, every single time you open up Unity. And it's kind of not required for you. It's not a persistent change that you need on Git. So you would ideally want to ignore that file, right? And so therefore, to ignore these kind of folders and files, you create something called a git ignore. Now I'm going to go back to, again, a repo that I have and copy over this git ignore, and I'll just run you through this file. So if you see this, we place this git ignore file at the root of the Unity project directory, right? And if you see, like I mentioned, the library file, right? There's a library file, the temp files, the object files, the build files, the logs, user settings. These are things that you don't need to kind of share remotely and need to be tracked across projects. There are automatically generated files like the CS project file and Unity project file and stuff, right? So you take the git ignore. This is again a standard git ignore that's available on the internet. I will link these files in this repo later on to this video on my Patreon. So if you want to get an access to the repository and just use this as a kind of baseline, you can find it on my Patreon. I'll link my Patreon below. So let's go ahead and see if there's already a git ignore. I don't think we created a git ignore yet. So ls, yeah, so I'm going to do nano.git ignore. If you're not comfortable with nano, you can just use text editor or just notepad. I'm just using it because I'm more comfortable, right? So I pasted the git ignore here, and I'm going to say, oops, I'm hitting the wrong button, sorry. Let me do that again. Let me paste that and say save. Okay, so now if you do git status, you will see two files. Now what has happened is, I will try for people who really don't know Git, basically we had a state. The Git tracks the state of your folder. So before this, we only had a license file, then we added two files. So it's kind of showing you a +2. And the way to check what files are changed is to type git status, and it tells you there are untracked files, right? So what we're going to do is, before we even move the Unity files into this folder, what we will actually do is to commit the git attributes and git ignore files, so that this folder is aware that the files are supposed to be ignored. Now, before you do this step, if you copy over all the Unity files or do something like that, what happens is that now you'll have to sit, then all those files will show up, because the Git is not aware that they have to be ignored yet, right? So I would suggest not doing that. So let's go ahead and add these two files. So the way you do that is git add, and you can do .git ignore. Okay, you can also, just to add all files, I will come to that. So now you see, once I've added that one file, that moves to green, which means it's been staged. Now once the file is staged, a staging is an intermediate kind of step where you're informing the Git system that you want this file to be staged and to be tracked. Okay, and those are not yet committed to the local. Even a commit is not remote. Okay, we will come to all that. I know this can get a little complicated, but whatever questions you have, please put them in the comments and I will try and answer them to the best of my abilities. Now we have taken a file that is not even tracked by Git here, and we have added it to say, please track this. Okay, we've just informed it to be tracked. Now we can do this for all files by doing git add and dot. Dot is like a wildcard which basically takes all the files in this current folder that we're in and adds them to tracking. So if you do git status, we immediately get these two files because those are the files that we have in our folder. And now what we do is, now that we have kind of finish staging them, we can actually commit them as a change, right? There's a difference between staging and committing. Staging files is to prepare them. It's just a preparation phase, and you can unstage them by saying git restore stage. If you see the comments here that Git automatically gives you to unstage, you can basically say git restore. Let's actually try that, git restore and staged and all of these files. And then what happens is these go back to being untracked. Okay, so that's how you can kind of, if say you've made a mistake, you don't want those files to be tracked, you can unstage them like this. So let me go ahead and do git add and dot. And now that we have staged them, I'm going to do a commit. Now the way you ideally would do a commit is to git commit a for all, and that will pop up an editor and stuff. But to avoid that, I'm just going to make it much simpler. Just say git commit, and you need to add a flag. Now these are flags. Again, if you're using GitHub for desktop, I know this doesn't cover that, but GitHub for desktop will have a simpler way of doing the same thing by adding a message using the GUI that's provided. It'll be way easier for you guys to do, so don't get worried. So git commit M stands for the message that you want to append to this commit, and in quotations I say initialized git ignore and Git LFS, because that is what we did. So try and keep your comments very specific to what you achieved during the task, right? So I'm going to say git commit, and there we're done with actually committing this particular thing. So if you hit git status, what is going to say is your branch is ahead of origin main. Now remember, I told you what origin is, right? And this, now what we've done is we have committed these changes to our local git section, which means the .git folder that you saw earlier that I showed you, the system that is created within this folder of handling git, which is your local, is what the changes are updated to. This is not updated to our repository in the remote. Let me show it to you. If I go back to my repo that we created, and if I say refresh, you see that my git ignore and my git attributes file hasn't shown up here. So remember this one important step, that when you commit something locally here on your system, it does not get automatically pushed to remote, right? So keep that in mind. So now to push it to remote, you can see that the command here is use git push to publish your local commits, right? So we're going to go ahead and type git push, and the moment we do that, it's going to go through a bunch of stuff and say this commit has been pushed to remote. And now if we go back to the repo in the remote and refresh it, you see the git ignore file that we pasted earlier and the git attributes file that we pasted earlier has been updated here 1 minute ago. So this is how it works, right? You do a git add, then you do a git commit, and then you do git push. Okay, so these are the 3 steps involved. And if you see git, I think it's git status. No, if you say git remote v, you will see what the origin is, and it'll quickly tell you what is the particular origin that's available. Cool. Now that we've done this, now there are 2 ways that we can actually get this Unity project tracked. Okay, so I think Unity is opened up here for me. I'm going to actually put this in a separate desktop. Okay, so Unity is open up for me, and we have the assets. Let me reveal this in Finder, and yeah. So if you see, this is our Git tracked kind of folder, and this is our Git tutorial Unity project. Now, how do we make sure that this particular project is tracked? Because if you see, Git is not automatically installed in this. Let's go back to CD and Git tutorial. This is the Unity project. If you see the files, all the Unity files are here. Now we can do one of two things. We can copy these files from here and actually put them in here. I'm going to paste this here. Okay, and this will work. So if you now go ahead and say git status, you see this Git tutorial Unity folder has already become, has now become the Git project, right? So this way you don't have to make any more changes. If you actually see, if you even do a git log, it will still show you what the remote files are. Everything is set up, the remote is set up, and you say git remote v, your remote is set up. And this is probably the simplest and easiest way to do this. Now make sure that if you remember, we copied all these files that were here, including the git attributes and git ignore. Don't only copy the git file. The other thing you can do is also the other way around. So you take all your files from here, right? I'm going to ignore the kind of git files we copied from the other folder and just take the Unity files, right? So these are the Unity files. Don't worry about copying all of these. They'll get ignored anyways. Ideally, you wouldn't copy solution files, but yeah, or library, but I'm just copying to show you that it's ignored. You copy these over, right, from the Unity project that you created, and go to the Unity tutorial folder and paste those in. Okay. So you can do one of two things. And if you close Unity up, down, and actually go to the Unity hub, then what you can do is go to add project from disk, and go to the Git folder that we create. Now this is the Unity project folder that we already have. Go to the Unity tutorial folder and say add project, and you have the Unity tutorial. So you can do one of two things, and the key and the magic that makes this all work is this particular .git folder. I wouldn't suggest constantly moving these across. Remember that this is just a starting step. I wouldn't expect you to kind of work on a project for a while and then move the .git folder separately. Is going to cause all kinds of issues. So please use it very carefully. This is just to make the starting setup easy, because what this now does, it starts tracking all the files and creates a particular log of stuff. Now let me show that to you. I'm just going to go back to the original folder and use that as a reference. So let's go to Unity tutorial, and now that you see, if you do git status, all these other files are untracked. I'm just going to do git add dot. Okay, and it's going to stage all the files. Now it's going to use our git ignore that we created and look at that, and that's why it's kind of taking time, and kind of ignore all the files under assets that are not going to be uploaded to the remote. As you can see, even in the untracked files, it's not showing you the library folder, because the library folder is part of the git ignore. So we have a total of 27 files. Now adding this can take time, so we will just wait for it to complete. In the meanwhile, I'm trying to see if there is anything else I need to touch on. Okay, normally it doesn't take that long. Okay, cool, it's done. So if you can see now, these are all the files. This is a list, kind of a summary of all the files that are going to be committed. and if you can see, the basic Unity kind of structure that is there has been added. Now, what if I go back to Unity and I say I want to maybe let me go to Unity and say open up, I think it was Unity tutorial. Yeah. Say I have just staged files, and then I want to make more changes before I commit, right? Let's bring Unity here. Cool. So let's go ahead and save this scene. And I'm going to save this scene as, maybe go to scenes and say GitHub tutorial scene, right? Let's just do that and maybe add game objects, right? And save it. Now, if you go back and type git status, you immediately say that one is project settings has been modified, and there are two new files that are untracked. Okay, so GitHub tutorial scene that we just created, the meta file that we created, and there's some automatic scene template.json that's been created. And if I, for example, make a prefab out of this and say create a prefab, then if I say git status, and you see there's a game objects.prefab that's created. Now you would again go and say git add dot. Okay, so for every change you make, right, you would do this in stages of updating this. So now I can go ahead and say git status, and you see everything is kind of staged. Now what I want to do is unstage the game objects.prefab and do that in a separate branch. Okay, so what I'm going to do is say git restore staged and choose the file. So game objects dot prefab, and I'm also going to do game objects dot prefab dot meta. Okay, just to make sure that doesn't cause any issues, because every game objects file has a meta file that we don't see in Unity editor, but that exists underneath. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is git commit, and what did we do for the commit? We created a Unity repository, Unity project, and set up basic scene, right? Git commit, gits, and now if I do git status, you know that commit is gone. If you do a git log, and you see that I have created a Unity project, and set up a basic scene has been committed, right? So how do I undo this change? Say I don't want to create a game objects prefab in this particular branch. I want to create a separate branch. So what I can do is actually say git reset hard. Okay, and if you do git status, you see that now it's untracked. These files are kind of untracked, and whatever other things that we might have added as changes are untracked. We can simply go ahead and delete the assets game objects file, and dot meta. Okay, so once we delete it, you see that everything is kind of clean. You don't have any additional files that need to be sent. I'm going to say git push, and now what we're doing is we're taking the local changes and we're pushing it remote, so that all our changes are now sent to the cloud and they're safely like stored, and that's been done. So if I go to GitHub and refresh it, now we have a basic Unity project. Now what happens if someone makes a remote change? Say someone else is working in a team and they say want to add a readme file, right? Let's do that and see how do you work with that, and how do you make sure that your local copy has the remote changes. So I'm going to add a remote readme here and say this is a Unity project. I'll say, actually I'll just put a heading, Unity GitHub tutorial. This is a simple tutorial. Oops, sorry for my typing issues. Showcasing how one sets up Unity with GitHub, right? And I'm going to commit the changes on remote, commit directly to the main branch, and Yeah. So you see there's a readme file here. Okay. And if you see the previously whatever commits I have kind of comments I'd put show up here, and kind of they are tracked. So now that I've added something remotely, right? If I go and check git status here, say git fetch all. What git fetch all does is git fetch all. It checks the remote branch and sees if there are any changes or everything is the same. Okay, so the moment I did that, it checked the remote and said, hey, your branch is behind origin main by one commit, which means someone else has kind of made a commit and can be fast forwarded. So what you would do is say git pull, and this is what you need to do whenever you switch to a new branch. Always do a git fetch to check if there are any changes, and if the changes are fine, make sure you do a git pull to not work on something that is not synced in. So I'm going to do git pull here, and if you see, we received a readme file. It says this one file change and two insertions, which are 2 lines, and we now have a readme file locally, right? Yeah, so we have a readme file here, and if you do cat readme.md, you will see that we get the text of that, which is a Unity GitHub tutorial. This is a simple tutorial showcasing. So this is how you sync in changes from a remote change into your local system. Say your friend is working or your colleague is working on a different branch and you want to sync in the changes. So how do we create, what are branches? Now branches, if you see here, this particular branch is called main, right? And branches are how we work on different features and how we work on different things that when we work as a big team that we do. For example, what we normally do is once a Unity project is set up, we immediately create a development branch. Okay, so I'm going to go do that now. You do that by doing git switch c development, right? So the C flag means create if it doesn't exist already. If you already have a development branch, you would just kind of say git switch development. How do you check with what branches you have? You just do git branch. Yeah, and you see that there is main. So say git switch C development, and it says switch to a new development branch. And the moment you switch to a new branch, what you can do is so that the remote immediately syncs with it. If you see here, you still only have one branch. So other people know that you created a new branch. You can say git push u origin development. Now, don't worry too much about this. If you're using a Git GUI like GitHub Desktop, this will be much simpler. But for those interested, you can kind of pick up these tips when you're working with the command line. So git push is basically what the u flag does is basically say, hey, now this branch that has switched to locally needs to track the origin development branch. Okay, if you don't do that, let me show you what happens. So let's say you're adding a particular, now let's go ahead and add a game object, right? Let's say, yeah, this got deleted because we kind of removed it. So okay, now let's say you create a game manager prefab, right? And you want to create that here, and you save the file and you say git status. Now you're in the development branch. If you see, you switched from main. Before this showed main, and then you switched here. So you're happy with these changes, and now you're going to add git add dot. Okay, and git status, you're happy with the changes. Say git commit m created a game manager prefab, and done. So now when you do git push, what happens? It gives you an error because prior to this, when you cloned the repo, your remote was already set. Remember I said there is local in this remote. Now it's complaining that it does not know where your remote is, right? So which is why what you normally do is the first time you're pushing to a new branch, you say git push u, which is setting up you're saying that what you're going to type after this is origin. Origin is again GitHub, and which branch in origin you're going to set it up to push to development, right? So this is a one-time thing. After you switch to a new branch or any branch, you type the u flag, right? git push u origin development. And what that does is it says, okay, now I know where these files need to go, and it pushes to development. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to say refresh, and you see development had recent pushes. And if you drop down the branches, you can see now that the remote has a development branch, right? Origin is remote. Okay, just remember that. Technically it's slightly different, but yeah. So we have a development branch now, and now that we already set the remote, say if I go and add another particular file, say I create a cube, right? I create a cube, I say let's create a materials folder and say create a material and say m_cube or whatever. Say, yeah, for now let's just be m_cube, make that color yellow maybe. Okay, and say drag and drop that onto the cube. Now we have a yellow cube, right? Let's lift that up slightly. Okay, cool. We have a yellow cube now. And if we go back and say git status, you see we've created a new material. We modified the scene itself. Notice that the game object within the scene itself won't kind of be tracked separately, only because we created a prefab last time that got tracked as a prefab. So let's say git add git status git commit m, and let's change the comment to created a simple cube, simple yellow cube with materials, right? So, and now you say git push, you don't need to put origin development because you've already set it up last time. When you do a git push, it automatically goes to that particular remote. Okay, so if you refresh this, you see you're on the development branch and you see that there's been updates just now. Okay, so created a simple cube with materials. Okay, so this is how you kind of work with Git with Unity. As you kind of work a little more, you will get more comfortable with it. And if you all really want a GitHub desktop kind of tutorial, let me know. I think once you understand this basic concept, GitHub desktop might be easier for you. The point of this is to understand the basic concept. All right. So best practices wise, what we do is your development branch, your main branch exists as, let's say Git branch. Okay. Your main branch exists as a release branch, or, you're just a final product branch. Only tested code, things that have been thoroughly tested within development and are working without any too many bugs, or which are considered release versions, can be pushed into main. I won't get into the structure of Git, how Git needs to be organized, but just for personal projects and how you basically set it up, I would create a main branch and a development branch. Okay. Now development branch is going to be your main development branch. Then what I like to do is, so if you're in the development folder and you create a new, remember this is important, where you create your git switch c branch will matter what files are tracked. So for example, if you go here, it says if you switch to the master branch, we have not kind of merged the development branch into the master branch, so the files are different here. If you see, you won't have the scenes that we created. Let me just go here. So we have a cube here and stuff, and we created a material here, but if we go to the material folder, we won't see a material folder in the main branch. Okay, obviously, because we didn't push it to the main branch. So but if you switch to the development branch, you can see that there's a materials folder. Okay, this is very important. If you want to get the work from development branch and create a sub branch under it, but if you switch to main and create a branch from here, switch C, and you create, say, a feature branch, gameplay programming, right? Then you will not have the changes. So don't do this. Okay, stay in your development branch, git switch. Just make it a habit to switch to development branch spellings, right? And now from this, which is your main trunk of all your work, what you do is git switch, and what I'd like to do is git switch C and say feature / say gameplay programming, right? So then what this does is it takes all the code that is there in your development branch, and it moves it makes a copy of that in a sub branch called feature gameplay programming. And like we said, the moment you create a new branch, say git push you origin, and then use not development, remember the branch that you created here. So origin feature gameplay programming. Okay, so then what happens is if you go back to the Unity tutorial, you say there is a new feature gameplay programming branch, and let's actually go back to let me now go to Unity. Say I'm going to create a new material, say m_cube_red, and let's rename this to _yellow. You normally would name these differently, but just for the purposes of this particular tutorial, we have a red kind of a thing, and then we have another cube here. So cube_red, cube_yellow. Okay, so cube_red will obviously have, I hope I've done this right. Cube_red and cube_yellow are two different, obviously you can't see them. Let's reset position. Okay, and move this on the x to 2, move this on the x to -2. Okay, so we have two cubes. Okay, so now that we have these two cubes, what we're going to do is go back to here, git status, and I'm going to add all the new files, git add, and say git commit. Another way you can add a git commit, but then you need to set up your command line editors here, which you don't need to get into, but this is just another option. So git commit and flag A, and then that opens whatever editor you have. So say, I really don't want to, it opened up Vim, and I really hate Vim, so let me escape, right, quit. Okay, cool. So yeah, this is why I don't like to do it. Git status, okay, and git commit m, added a new, did we add a red cube? Yeah. Okay, so git status, you see that we have a new commit, say git push. All right, so now we have added something new. I think this tutorial is actually becoming quite long, but I wanted to touch on this important aspect. So we've added something new, right? So if we go to our, let's switch branch to development. Okay, if we go to assets folder and go to materials, you will see that we have, we don't have the red cube or the changes we made to this, but if we change to feature gameplay programming, you see that we have a cube red and cube yellow that we've refactored and redesigned. So how do I get the changes from the feature gameplay programming back up into development branch? Now there are two ways of doing this. One is I can manually git switch to development, and what I can do is say git merge and say feature. Where do you want to merge from? You're merging into the current branch you are in, which is development, but you want to merge, git merge feature gameplay programming, right? And what that does is takes all the files from there, okay, and merges them into your local development branch, and see all, it gives you a summary of all the additions and all that. So you say git status, okay, so it says, hey, we need to, you're one commit behind origin because you've now got new files from feature gameplay programming. So let's say git push. Okay, and now it's going to push to remote. So let's refresh this, And if I switch to development now, okay, development branch, you see now the development branch has the cube red and cube yellow, etc. Now, this is one way of doing it, but I wouldn't suggest this. What in a professional environment, what you would ideally do, and this is kind of getting a little advanced, so I won't get too deep into it. Say you have a new feature branch, see feature, and say, what do you want to call? Asset update, just random. Okay, and you say gets, let's say git push you origin feature assets update. Now that you've done it, okay, say what you need to do is say you want to add a particular image, or maybe just for the sake of this, just say and create another material. I'm being lazy with what I'm creating, but this is just a tutorial about Git. So m_cube_blue, and we set that to be blue. Okay, and then we duplicate this and say this is blue, and set this position to 0, and drag and drop this material here. Okay, so we have 3 cubes now. Sorry about that. And we're gonna add all these files and git commit m, added a new blue cube, and git status. Now it says git push to your feature assets update. So git push. Okay. And it's pushed. Now, instead of switching to development and merging it, normally what you would ideally do is create a pull request. Okay. Without getting into too much detail, is a pull request is basically where you say, hey, say you are a person working exclusively on this asset branch. You would ideally say, hey, my manager, I fixed the code in this particular feature. I want you to review and then accept the changes so that you do not break someone else's work, right? So you will just say, this is done. I'm pushing it to remote. I'm creating a pull request, and it's up to your manager to review whatever you've pushed and make sure that the code is according to the standards, and according to that kind of merge it into that, right? So you wouldn't directly be updating the main development branch so that you don't break anything, right? So remember that one thing. Again, depends on how your entire Git pipeline in your company or whatever, where you're working, where you're going to work is based. You can kind of ignore this on personal projects, but it's a good habit to develop. So you can do pull requests locally through say GitHub's own command line, but what I will do is let me go to the repo itself. So if you see, you automatically get these particular notifications. Says feature asset update had recent pushes 1 minute ago, compare and pull request. You can click on that or go to pull request and do it manually. Okay, say new pull request. So it'll give you a summary of what particular branches had an update. So since we pushed an update to feature asset update, I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to say create. Let me choose development. Okay, so I want to take the feature asset update and create a pull request to be pulled into the development branch. Okay, it'll give you a summary of what has been changed. You can also, if your manager tells you, I want you to merge it into, say, gameplay programming, whatever. Normally it would be a main branch or release branch or whatever, depending on the work that you're doing. So you just go ahead and say create a pull request and say added a new blue cubed and created a material and added a new blue cube. Okay, and say create pull request. The moment you do that, the system is going to kind of compare it automatically and see if there are any conflicts with the base branch, which is your development branch and all that. And normally, because I have rights to this repo, it's allowing me to merge this, but normally it wouldn't. So now switch to the context of, say, you're the manager, you log into pull requests and you will see something saying added a new blue cube that someone, like my employee or whatever has created. I will go into that, see if everything is fine, and I will, as a manager, say, okay, confirm merge. Okay, I don't see any issues, and it'll say pull requests successfully merged and closed, you can delete this branch, but we won't delete this branch. So if you now actually go to the code and switch to, say, the development branch, and let's go to assets materials. Because the pull request has been kind of approved, you will see that the blue cube has also turned up into development, and you didn't do it manually by merging it in the development branch. So now the one of the most important things when this happens is, so you say you want to switch back to git switch development branch. Okay, now you're all set and you're all excited to start a new branch. So you immediately are like git switch c feature asset update, say asset, say new assets. Okay, and you made a mistake here, because if you say okay, let's go to the assets folder. Actually, let's just open it up and say go to assets materials. You don't have a blue cube, right? You don't have a blue cube, and you're like, what happened? The pull request happened. You did not pull in those remote changes. Okay, so let me switch back to development. Okay, because you created a pull request remotely and didn't merge it locally, now locally, because you switched to the development branch, you'll have to do a git fetch all, which, yeah, I meant git fetch. Oh yeah, oh sorry, my bad. Yeah, so, and then it says, hey, there is a new change, and then you do a git pull. Okay, and you see the blue cube has first gone from your local branch to GitHub, gotten updated through a pull request, and then you have to pull it back down locally. This is one of the biggest mistakes that people make. They completely forget how to do this, and so it's kind of something that people get tripped up over and completely work on entire sections, and then they realize that they didn't have the changes that they needed to have. So again, remember, whenever you switch to a new branch, do a git fetch all and say git pull. Okay, and if it's clear and says already up to date, go ahead. Now, how do I fix this issue? I have already gone to git switch feature and say new, did we call it new assets? Yeah, new assets, right? And we don't have the change. That's okay. The same way we pulled the previous changes into upstream and from a feature branch into development, we can now pull this down, say git merge development. Okay, so it's taken those files and fix your mistake by pulling down those development changes back into your feature assets, and then you can continue working on it. Okay, I hope this is clear. I'm just trying to share all the mistakes that we have made and things that we forget, and this is how you start working on with Git. It's a little daunting at first, but as you work more on it, you will start realizing the benefits and how you can avoid losing work, losing files, making mistakes and reverting mistakes. This is like a super powered Control Z if you want to think about it. It's an undo action with multiple features and branches and all those things and ways of fixing it. So I hope I've covered everything. I hope you're able to follow. I know for some of you this is way too complicated in advance, but even if you understood the basic concept of how Git works and how you can get started with working with Git, I think the rest of it you can figure out. So if you like this video, do hit that like button and do leave a comment. If you have any questions whatsoever, do comment and let me know what issues you're facing. I will share this repo with you guys on Patreon, so do check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com, the lazy Indian techie. And yeah, it's been nice recording this tutorial after a while. I hope you guys got something out of it. Have a nice day. I'll see you in the next video.